This episode, of all the episodes this series, is easily the most forgettable. I think that's the reason there tends to be very little interest on this episode, specifically. I wouldn't blame anyone for that. Episode 9 is just like any other episode this series. The characters are boring, the setting is lame, the monsters suck, there's horrendous dialogue, and there's storytelling choices that make no sense. I can only repeat myself so much with this series. There's nothing more to add to this episode I haven't already brought up before. I've already said don't watch this series, don't subject yourself to it. Any enjoyment I've gained from it isn't enough to justify the watch time. It's a far cry from what Doctor Who used to be. There is no passion, no creativity. You've heard it all before by now, you're as well just not watching this review. I mean, by all means, watch this review. Goodness knows I could use the watch time. Rather than just criticise this episode, I'm also going to suggest any changes the episode itself could have made to improve or mend it, as well as any changes that could be done to let the episode stand on its own without changing the core plot. The story is the most basic you can get. The Doctor and gang arrive in modern day Norway. They head to a boarded up cottage because it looks suspicious. Not out of complete curiosity, but because there's something wrong. Like it's always been the case for this series for some reason, they break into the home to find a blind girl who's missing her dad, discover something weird with the house, and try to figure out what's wrong. Not really any more complicated than any other episode this series. It only seems more complicated than it is from the excessive amount of dialogue. The dialogue is more of a detriment to the episode at the third act, but it's still an annoyance that drags in the first two. The very beginning of the episode has the characters have a conversation with each other, except it's less of a conversation and more the actors just saying what they're supposed to say to progress the plot. At face value, this opening scene may seem harmless, but that's what unfortunately makes it so boring. It doesn't use the characters or what they've experienced to say anything worthwhile. Instead, it just wants to get them to the location they need to be as quickly as possible. A lot of episodes have this same problem. They haven't been using the time they have wisely. Moments that go too fast are only countered by moments that take forever. Every now and again, we get a scene that has an interesting idea or paces itself well, but I don't think there's a single episode that has that happen more than once, if at all. How appropriate that the scene directly after this one is actually paced quite alright. The Doctor and gang break into the suspicious, battle-torn looking cottage and examine it. The scene actually takes its time and is able to show off a lot without going into too much detail.
Maybe we shouldn't be in here.
There's a child in this house.
Or some maniac that collects kids' shoes.
You two go check upstairs.
Right.
The episode also takes its time when Ryan and Graham come across the mysterious young girl, and the characters ask her questions that make sense in this moment in time. It's nothing phenomenal, but I can't really think of any other way to improve this bit. It's decent, but that's as good as it gets, unfortunately. On second thought, I can think of one improvement.
What's your name? Hannah.
What?
Hannah. Are you blind, Hannah?
No, she did not just say Hannah, Doctor. I mentioned this in the last review, so I won't go into too much detail about this. But be more clear in your speech, please. The gang find out that Hannah is alone and has been for days now. Hannah explains her dad disappeared after boarding up the house like we saw previously. Hannah also explains there is a monster outside that hunts in the woods close by. On second thought, Hannah does dump a lot of information on the characters. Huh. Don't get me wrong, it's all information that makes sense coming from her, but what information she does tell is either very minor or something we could have learned in a more creative way. For example, how about instead of the Doctor and gang only hearing the monster just after learning about it, they hear it well before they even get to Hannah's cottage and break inside it for safety without even considering that anyone may be living there. After which, once the monster seems to have vacated the area, they find Hannah, who's quivering in fear. That way, when we listen to Hannah explaining everything to the main characters regarding her missing dad and her time being alone, it gets our minds guessing. It keeps us interested. What's funny is that I've barely changed anything that'll affect the plot. All I've really done is swapped 2 scenes around to condense and reveal information in a way that feels more natural. Now, Hannah doesn't need to explain why she's scared and that there's a monster outside, because the characters already know there's a monster out there. Sure, it might knock a minute or 2 off the runtime, but that's a good thing. That means they could use that extra time to develop the characters properly. How to develop them? I don't know. What does Ryan think of the situation? What does Yaz think? Are all of them convinced there is really a monster outside? Thinking about it, there is one good example of a character building moment that works quite well.
Not hungry, are you? Because these days I always carry a cheese and pickle sarnie, you know, just for emergencies.
You carry sandwiches with you every time you leave the TARDIS.
Yeah, well, I've learned the hard way, haven't I? I mean, we can go a long time without eating, and I get a bit cranky with the old low blood sugar level. Now, I always come prepared.
It's short, but it's good. This is the small character building moments I'm looking for. Sure, the entire thing barely lasts 10 seconds, but it got a laugh out of me, and it helps us understand what kind of person Graham is. This is the sort of stuff I'm talking about. Series 11 has been missing more moments like this. It's not like I'm asking for much, I'm just asking for something like this so I can enjoy these characters more. The episode Kerblam seemed to attempt something similar for Ryan when he talks about his dyspraxia, but there's nothing in that scene that feels remotely convincing. The scene doesn't do anything creative or funny with it, it's just Ryan talking about the trouble he's had with his condition, even though by that point he went 6 episodes in a row without having any trouble with it. I can't get down with Ryan's character because it feels fake. Same goes for Yaz. Any scene that has Ryan and Yaz talking about the trouble they had in their past doesn't convince me, because we simply haven't seen them go through any hardships that justify their stories. More so Yaz than Ryan. That's obviously why I like Graham so much more than the other characters. We've actually seen him go through hardships. We've seen him alone in his house. We know why he travels with the Doctor. He travels with her to cope with losing Grace. That's what makes this short but nice scene work, because we like Graham. If they had done more with Ryan and Yaz, it could have improved the series so much, but either due to laziness, lack of time, or inept writing, we're left with walking, talking hollow shells. Speaking of which, the Doctor tells Ryan and Yaz to explore the shed to see if they can find anything. Because I guess that's all they do in this series, go somewhere and explore it. They always seem to find something too.
You were great with her back there. I'm rubbish with kids.
Yeah, I've had training. You have to reinforce whatever it is that makes them feel safe.
Hey, we finally learned something about Yaz. We learned that she is good with kids. 9 episodes in. Huh. Funny how this is only brought up when a kid is involved in the story. Now I'm starting to think that this probably wasn't on Yaz's character sheet, and instead just made up on the spot because the episode called for it. Man, if there's a character sheet for Yaz somewhere, I'd love to see what it says, if anything. So, here's the first 10 minutes of the episode. There's not much to say about it because the characters pretty much tell you everything, even the stuff you don't really need to know. So what would I change? Well, for starters, I'd open the episode with the Doctor and gang walking through the countryside, rather than standing outside the TARDIS. The thing about Doctor Who is that the Doctor doesn't always have to go out of his way looking for trouble. A lot of the time trouble just seems to happen, and the Doctor wanders his way into it. But for this series it seems like no matter where the Doctor lands, trouble happens immediately after, as if the TARDIS is dropping them in locations that need help the most. I think if the episode started with the main characters walking through the woods, having a conversation for a minute or two, it would feel like more time had passed since the last episode and give them time to explore the world a bit more, which is what they set out to do from episode 4. So instead of the characters asking the Doctor where they are, the audience can piece it together through their dialogue or as the episode goes on. What would they talk about? I don't know, anything. How about Ryan getting bored off his mind while trekking through the woods, or Yaz getting troubled about how cold the temperature is? They could really be talking about anything. Something that isn't just questions for the Doctor to answer for the audience's benefit, like it's always been this series. After this, they hear a faint roar coming from the distance and get curious. As they approach further and further, the roaring gets louder and louder until they decide enough is enough and they start running. And running. You could even have the Doctor pull out her sonic screwdriver or something, only to get a blank reading before she starts running away. They, of course, run into the cottage, break in and try to escape whatever seemed to be chasing them. As the monster seems to vacate the area, the Doctor and gang check out the house they barged into, only to realise that someone might actually be living here. Oh dear. That's when they find Hannah and discover about her missing dad. From there, the episode could play as normal, without having everyone go outside, only to go back in the house again. See, what I've done here is made it so everything happens more naturally, instead of things happening for the sake of moving the plot along, and I've trimmed the fat by making these two scenes redundant. If I were to guess, that would probably save a good 4 minutes. What would I fill these extra 4 minutes with? Well, anything. Maybe Hannah could give them a tour of the house, and maybe we could learn a little more about her. Actually, I think improving Hannah's character would be a good start. In the episode, she is the most depressed kid I've ever seen. She's nothing but sad, scared, alone. It makes sense in the context of the story, but you could do a lot more with Hannah than just have her be scared all the time. For one, she's blind. How has being blind affected her through her life? How has she coped with it? Maybe she could develop a more positive outlook in life due to her learning to cope with her disability. It could make for a more interesting and likeable character. A young girl having her kind-hearted nature be tested by the disappearance of her father and a lurking monster outside her home? Actually, the more I describe this, the more I feel like I'm describing Clementine from the Walking Dead game. That's a good comparison actually. Clementine was perceived very positively, so making Hannah a bit more like that may have made for a more memorable character. Again, for what she is, there's nothing wrong with Hannah, per se, but she could have been a lot more. So, just like everyone else then. So yeah, give Hannah a more positive personality and develop the characters in a meaningful way. Have the characters converse with each other about something other than the plot and grow as individuals. Let their relationship grow alongside helping Hannah. It's possible. Doctor Who has had moments just like this in the past. In between the excitement and action, there's always a time to sit and develop. That was the first 10 minutes. Only 39 more to go. Graham and Ryan discover a strange portal that doesn't reflect their image. Graham touches it, and...
Oh, what's that noise?
That's the wrong question, Graham. The Doctor catches up with the two boys and is able to... lock it mid whatever it was doing. Her words, not mine. We get a pretty neat effect as the Doctor pushes herself through the mirror, discovering it as some sort of portal.
What was the noise? The whole house started to vibrate.
Oh really? That would have been cool to see. How much does it take to have a 2 to 4 second scene of hearing the portal from Yaz's point of view? The whole house vibrating? That would have been an effective way to show how powerful the portal is. But since this episode doesn't take advantage of what it has, we can only take her word for it. Again, I'm no asking for much. Either way, the Doctor's only option at this point is to go through the dimensional portal.
I'm coming with you.
Me too. So am I.
And me? Whatever's happening, I'm staying with you.
I can't let you do that, Hannah. I don't know what's through there. You're safe here, your dad made sure of that. Also, I need you to keep protecting this house from whatever's outside. Ryan will stay here with you.
Oh, what?
Not him.
Hey, what's that for?
Doctor, I don't think leaving Ryan with Hannah was your best plan. Literally 3 minutes ago, the episode established that Yaz was good with kids, and Ryan was terrible with kids. I think a much better plan would have been to leave Yaz with Hannah and have Ryan go through the dimensional portal with you. True, you weren't actually around for this conversation between Yaz and Ryan, but you really should have picked it up from their behaviour towards Hannah beforehand. At the very least, Yaz should have been the one to offer to stay behind and let Ryan go with you if she really cared about Hannah. It's bad enough that one of the writers lazily gave Yaz a single character trait 9 episodes in, but it's worse that when they finally do get around to it, they completely ignore it in the very episode that established it. Did anyone proofread this? Before the gang go through the portal, the Doctor writes a message on the wall, claiming it's a map of the house.
This is a map of the house with its most vulnerable points. Make sure you take care of them.
It's a neat bit of visual storytelling that's so rare in this show for some reason. I guess it's cool that they were able to use Hannah's disability to influence the story slightly, except for the fact that it doesn't really make a difference. Hannah sees right through the Doctor's writing shortly after they leave and questions Ryan about what she really wrote down. So it's more as if the episode pretends to use her disability as a plot point rather than actually using it to change anything. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I don't know. Moving on. The Doctor, Yaz and Graham find themselves in a very dark and claustrophobic cave system on the other side of the portal. This is probably the worst section in the entire episode. It's all terrible. I don't have to tell you about the location itself because you can look at it for yourself. It's dark and superbly dull to look at. The Doctor and gang quickly find an alien who's pecking away at some sort of animal. This was the episode's chance to explain more about this location, but since the writing in this series is terrible, of course it doesn't do that. Instead of learning about this area from a character that takes residence in it, we get an uninteresting baddie who barely lasts 5 minutes.
Madam, my name is Ribbons of the Seven Stomachs. I so want your tubular. Such a shiny tubular. Because Ribbons did see the man you seek.
Ribbons is a generic and boring sleazebag. We don't learn anything worthwhile from him except for the fact that he's lived here all his life. Information that only becomes more worthless as he's eaten by moth monsters. Probably for the best. I'm convinced the only reason Ribbons exists is to pad out time. Speaking of which, the so-called flesh moths suck equally as much. They're another type of monster that reside in the so-called anti-zone. The main reason they're so terrible is because they don't make any sense. Sometimes they're attracted by light, sometimes they're attracted by food, sometimes they're attracted by movement, and sometimes they're attracted by noise. They never seem to be attracted by more than one thing at a time. They're only ever attracted by what the plot demands, which is terrible. How would I change this bit? Simple. Completely cut Ribbons and the Flesh Moths. As long as you have strong characters and good writing, which is one of the things Doctor Who was generally known for, they're not necessary. If there was any more to the shoehorned antagonists, I'd probably be able to think of ways to change something about them to make them worthwhile, but since there is a minuscule amount of detail that's gone into them, it would be better for everyone to just remove them entirely from the episode. To add anything to Ribbons or the Flesh Moths wouldn't improve them enough to be worth it. Plus, the less time spent in the anti-zone the better. If you had to have a threat in this episode though, I would keep the Flesh Moths and just make them more consistent with how they function. Either way, we got what we got, so the Doctor and gang follow Ribbons through the dark anti-zone to find where Hannah's father went. In the meantime, we spend a small amount of time with Ryan and Hannah.
Must be hard.
I don't need you to feel sorry for me.
Why don't you like me?
You thought my dad would leave me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Which bit of the house is weakest on the map? That's not a map, is it?
It's totally a map.
What are you hiding from me? Let go of me! Hey, give me that key!
How about we stop arguing and recheck our defenses?
Ryan will stay here with you.
Yeah, probably not one of your brightest ideas, Doctor. Throughout Ryan and Hannah's time together, nothing really happens between these two. Again, the episode doesn't take advantage of what it has because the writers have no creativity. Well, either that, or they just stick with what's safe and write Hannah with such little flaws or characteristics because they're too scared of accidentally offending someone by writing Hannah that way. Look at what you have. You have a blind character. Give her flaws. Give her a personality. All you've done is make her a defenseless, pathetic girl who can't depend on herself. True, being blind limits what a character can do, but you can still make it work. What if instead of having Hannah go through the anti-zone with a fearful attitude, you make her determined to find her father? She doesn't see the dark and claustrophobic caves of the anti-zone. What's it to her? We could even make it that when Ryan catches up with her, she leads the way as Ryan cowers behind her. It's that simple. That's how you use a character like this. That's how you give her something that no one else has. But we don't have any of that because we get a scared child who behaves like any other scared child would in this place, blind or not. Hang on. I just thought of something that could fix Ribbons. Let Hannah find him and befriend him. How? I don't know. Maybe Ribbons doesn't die after he loses his light and meets up with Hannah, who helps guide him through the darkness. Maybe Hannah could see right through Ribbons' deception due to her experience of having to listen to people's tone of voice and deeper meaning behind their words. Maybe Ribbons feels guilty for trying to scam a blind girl. I don't know, anything. Anything would work. That would make Hannah and Ribbons so much more interesting. That would kill two birds with one stone. What are you doing, Doctor Who? Well, there is one thing I like from Hannah. This bit is so hilarious that I could watch it over and over. Now, in a clip-based review, this would usually be the point where I repeat the moment for a few times. But I'm not that petty. Once the Doctor, Graham and Yaz get out the anti-zone, the episode suddenly looks a lot nicer. They finally find Hannah's father, Eric, who stayed in the alternate dimension because his deceased wife was there. It turns out boarding up his house, making oversized bear traps and convincing everyone that there was a monster outside by setting up speakers in his garden just so Hannah wouldn't go outside, was unrelated to him going through the portal. I give up. I thought all of this happened so that Hannah would be safe from going outside while he was away in the portal, but it turns out all of this is unrelated to him going through the portal. At least that's what I got from this confusing dialogue. Basically, Eric travelled through the portal and found his dead wife alive and well on the other side. He set up the traps around his house to keep Hannah from leaving the house while he was away. But he says this.
She can't leave. We try, but she can't go through the mirror. I know I stayed away from Hannah too long, but I kept thinking, what if I go and I can't come back?
So wait, he's only been through the portal once and didn't want to risk going back? Then how and why did he prepare all the traps at his home before going through it for the first time? If this isn't his first time, why didn't he just bring Hannah with him? What was that thing I said earlier? I don't know, something about rereading what you wrote? What's the word? I don't care about this anymore. The point is that Eric is a deadbeat dad that everyone doesn't like, because we totally need another antagonistic force like this in this series. Like, we haven't had enough already.
I'm gonna hit him.
No, you're not. I am.
Nobody's gonna hit anyone. Long day. Flesh moths and anti-zones. Now...
So not really a long day then. At least this scene does get more interesting right after they finish talking. They head outside only to find Grace from episode 1.
Graham O'Brien. You better tell me right now what's going on.
Don't do this to me.
Now this is where After we end the pointless scene with Ryan and Hannah, Graham and Grace have a very engaging conversation. What really sells this scene to me is the performance.
It killed me. But now, I'm here with you. I don't understand.
No, neither do I.
Why are you being so off for me?
Because this isn't possible.
I know. But I'm here, love. I'm real.
It helps that we've seen Graham go through losing Grace and the effect it had on him. We understand exactly how he's feeling. Graham at this point is still trying to cope with the loss of Grace, so when you see him try to make sense of seeing her again, it's powerful stuff. It works at the very least. Of course, there's always a catch. It seems like whenever we have a good thing going in this series, it has to be ruined somehow. So how is the scene ruined?
If you're Grace, tell me everything about this necklace.
It's mine. You gave it to me 2 Christmases ago. Same year Ryan got me a different frog necklace. 'Cause I like frogs.
Well, to be fair, it didn't ruin the scene, but this frog necklace was something that was never brought up until right at this moment. Yet again, in this episode, if the writers had planned this out better, it might have made more sense, but as is, they don't do that. It's just something made up for the sake of making something up. Something made up for the sake of making something at the climax less random. We'll get to that in a bit. We, of course, have to balance out the good by giving us something horrible. Thankfully, the episode gives us a 3-minute scene. Exactly 180 seconds of the Doctor explaining what the plot of this episode is to the audience. I mean, Yaz. Maybe it'd be worth it if they actually did something creative with it. But of course they don't. It's just the Doctor making up guesses in her head that happen to be correct. This is probably one of the worst scenes in the entire series from how awful it is. Basically, the universe they're in at the moment has a consciousness called the Solitract. The so-called Solitract lured Eric from their universe by taking the form of his dead wife just to be friends with him. What I just told you in 8 seconds, Doctor Who decides it should tell you in 3 minutes. This moment epitomizes all the problems this series has, and this episode in particular. For one, there is way too much dialogue that makes the whole explanation difficult to follow.
This mirror is a direct portal between two worlds. We went into it in the real world, we came out of it in this world. But that antidote...
Great conversation, guys. But unnecessary talking can lead to efficiency reductions. Why not pick up the pace a little?
For another thing, it's only 2 people in a room talking with nothing creative or imaginative on show to spice things up. As if this wasn't bad enough, we get more of Dr. 13's patented guesswork.
Oh, and suddenly, everything makes sense.
Where she tells us everything that's going on without knowing for sure, just because the writers don't know how to convey the story in a creative way and need the Doctor to explain it to us quickly, even though it doesn't even do that, because it takes 3 minutes. And of course, the way the Doctor's able to know all of this is because it was part of a bedtime story told by the Doctor's grandmother.
It's a theory, a myth, a bedtime story my gran used to tell me.
You had a grandmother?
I had 7, but Granny 5, my favourite, used to tell me about the Solitract.
Okay, there's 2 main things wrong with this. One is diving into the Doctor's family history so frivolously. Generally, there's a lot of mystery regarding the Doctor's family, and talking about it in the way this episode does removes some of that mystery in a way that does not service the episode in any meaningful way. It's just used to make cheap jokes about 7 grannies because, well, weird alien family magic. But this issue is one that is more troubling to hardcore fans than the average viewer, and is a much smaller issue compared to the fact that this was the first time the writer made this up on the spot for the sake of moving the plot along. Again! And the cherry on top of this disastrous attempt to explain the central concept of this episode is...
Your gran told you this is a bedtime story.
Only when I had trouble sleeping. So, what did I...
That's right, everyone. I know this is boring to listen to. You know this is boring to listen to. And the writers know this is boring to listen to. I hope you enjoyed that joke at the story's expense as compensation. Which brings us to today's sponsor, Skillshare. The whole climax is just the Doctor making all the right guesses and knowing exactly what to do. I really have trouble finding a care for anything other than Graham in this 3rd act. When the mirror universe starts to collapse from the excess amount of people in it, Graham struggles to let go of Grace. You could see how torn Graham is with having to leave Grace again. This is honestly some good stuff.
Doc, I know what you're asking me to do. I just can't do it.
She's not your wife. She's furniture with a pulse.
Was it just me, or did I just hear a good line coming from the Doctor? It was probably just me. Again, it's all in the performance. I'll be honest, when I heard Bradley Walsh was going to be a companion, I never expected he would be the best and well-written character out of all of them. He really has been given the most to work with and does a really good job with it all. For a moment, I was convinced that Graham was going to stay in the Mirror Universe, just from how torn he was. In hindsight, that was probably silly to think that, especially because that would mean we would have lost the only interesting character in the whole series, but the fact that this series was able to make me concerned for a character speaks volumes to how terrible everything else is. Once Graham inevitably lets go of this fake Grace, the episode attempts to do the same thing with Eric, a character we've only met for 5 minutes and are taught to hate from his actions towards Hannah. Needless to say, it doesn't work as well. What would I change then? Well, I've already said I would rather Ryan go through the portal with Graham and the Doctor instead of Yaz. That way, Ryan could experience seeing Grace and have his own opinion on it. The way Graham reacts and behaves to seeing Grace is already well done, so the addition of Ryan on the scene could make this moment a ton stronger, and go towards developing Ryan's character. Ryan could remain unconvinced he's looking at his own grandmother, whereas Graham stays the way he was. I picture huge amounts of conflict between Ryan and Graham that could make for some very engaging drama. With Yaz out the picture, that would mean the awful 3-minute scene where the Doctor explains the plot would be told to Ryan instead. Obviously, I'd trim down the time she takes explaining it all and get rid of any jokes that weaken the overall mystery of the show and flat out acknowledge how uninteresting their own plot is. Say I couldn't trim down the time, as that would make the episode far too short for its full runtime. I would then try to reveal the information in a creative way. It could range from anything from using nothing but visuals to describe what the Doctor is trying to say, or by having the Doctor draw a diagram on the wall. Anything that isn't just the Doctor and someone else just standing and talking. I find the questions Yaz asked during that scene would make more sense for Ryan to be asking, as he would be more skeptical about the whole thing. As well as asking any questions to figure out what's going on, this is when we would also listen to what Ryan has to say regarding his feelings towards Graham and why he doesn't believe this Grace is real. If this scene had incorporated Ryan instead of Yaz, it could have had the potential to be very powerful. The same way Graham is conflicted in seeing Grace, Ryan could be equally as conflicted, except in a more pessimistic outlook. Imagine Ryan talking to the Doctor, trying to make sense of all of this, beginning to second guess himself while trying to keep a clear mind. Ryan is supposed to be young, so obviously he'd be very distraught about this, especially if he had an argument with Graham earlier on. When you have a character like Yaz in a scene like this, you will gain nothing from her. It just makes the scene uninteresting and drag on for longer than it should. I don't understand why they ever thought Yaz would be a better pick than Ryan for this aspect of the story. I also wouldn't let the Doctor work out the full answer by herself in one go either. Maybe she could deduce some details, but I would make it so the universe they're in starts to slowly become more and more unstable before she pieces it all together. Knowing at least enough to realise they're in danger, the Doctor decides the best course of action is to try and escape the mirror universe. Any questions the audience or characters still have about the Solitract could be answered in the scene coming up later, which I'll talk about in a minute, where the exposition could be conveyed a lot more naturally. Nothing would change with Yaz if she wasn't present in the mirror universe. She would instead be looking after Hannah. Perhaps Hannah could either sneak into the portal or convince Yaz to go through with her. Either way, it could make for some interesting and fun conversations. At least it would if these two were even remotely interesting. I don't think I would change much with Eric, except making his reasoning for leaving Hannah make more sense, as well as the timing of events. I would probably play Eric off as a broken man who's lost everything. Someone whose loss of his wife caused him to go into a deep depression, rather than whatever the episode attempted to make him. When Hannah met up with her father and said,
"You're not well."
I never got that impression. He appears to be a reasonable, calm and honest guy. His demeanour near the end of the episode doesn't quite match his actions we learned of previously. I think if he was depicted as a destroyed soul, it would be a lot more convincing that he would do what he did. You also have Graham and Eric, two people who have lost their wives, both going through the grieving process, and they don't exchange a single meaningful word to each other. Couldn't you at least attempt to draw some parallels between the two? That's about the extent of everything I would change. It might seem like I'm glossing over a few details, and I am, but not much. The dialogue is as you'd expect by this point. Overstuffed full of exposition, one-liners, unnecessary information, and information we learn later anyway. If I were to go over all of what's said in the third act, it would take ages. We're still not quite done yet. Everyone leaves one by one, leaving only the Doctor alone with the Solitract. This part is weird. It's weird.
Why is there a frog in here?
Who said I could stop being Trina?
The Solitract is a frog. Who talks like Grace.
My own form is endless, but this frog is a form that delights me, as it once delighted Grace.
Now, most of you who are probably seeing this for the first time might be thinking,
what the hell is even that?
I tell ya, when I saw this when it aired on television, I laughed. I laughed a lot. Mind that I was kind of dozing off and not paying too much attention due to being unable to keep up with the pace of the dialogue, so you could imagine my shock when this moment pops up. This was the highlight of the episode for me, and an experience I had watching Doctor Who I will never forget. However, once I got over it and started to actually think about it, well...
What the hell is even that?
The reason the universe took the form of a frog was because it liked frogs, which it got from Grace because she liked frogs, which is something that was entirely made up 10 minutes ago. That's a terrible justification to have the Doctor talk to a frog. Having to make up a character trait on the spot just to have something random make more sense in the same episode is terrible. Maybe this could have worked if we knew Grace liked frogs back in episode 1, but we don't. It's obvious that this was shoehorned in without thinking it through. Why does it have Grace's voice? Is it because it likes Grace's voice too? What are the limits of the Solitract in this universe? I'd assume the limits are endless, but that isn't exactly the case. It's hard to tell what the limits are and it isn't explicitly explained. I thought at first that it was limited to the thoughts of people that reside in this particular universe, because the form of Grace disappears when Graham is forced through the portal. But it doesn't explain why the form of Trina stays after Eric is forced out. Maybe limits are endless for it, but if that's the case, why doesn't it just create a new friend for itself? And if it can't, why not? Why doesn't the Doctor or Yaz see someone they knew in the Mirror universe? Eric and Graham did, why not the other two? Well, maybe not so much Yaz, but the Doctor has had so many companions and losses, and not one person she once knew was in the Mirror universe. Why did you spend 3 minutes trying to explain everything about the Solitract, but I still have all these questions? This is a mess. Half these episodes seem to completely drop the ball when it comes to the endings, which is weird because this ending is... fine. It's fine. The concept of the Solitract is interesting on how it has immense power, yet uses it for its selfish and rather immature intent. The dialogue could be better, but the climax fits with the theme of the episode, and it's a good moral. It's nothing special though, it's mostly just dragged down by all the other problems, like anything good in this series. What would I change in this bit? I guess I make the dialogue better, though that goes for everything here. You know, why does it have to be a frog? The episode takes place in Norway. There's tons of interesting creatures in Scandinavian folklore, right? Yeah, I mean, that's about all I would change for this bit. There's very little to change or add that could improve it enough to be worth it. At any rate, we have what we have, and we have a frog. Frogs are pretty funny, and I'm not one to pass up on a good joke or two. Let's take a moment to watch all the frog humour I can think of. Why? Because I just love Doctor Who so much!
But it's not working. It can never work.
You know, it's amazing. You are 100% wrong. I mean, nothing you've said has been right.
Hello, my baby. Hello, my honey. Hello, my ragtime gal.
Froggy?
I have waited a long time for this moment, my little green friend. Not if anything to say about it. I have.
Why is there a frog in here?
Kissing would be nice, yes?
My dear boy,
I am proud to call you my son. And I'm proud to call you my frog king dad-in-law.
Why is there a frog in here?
The English little girlie. She's so aggressive.
Ugh, la frog.
I like a woman with a little fire.
Fucking normies!
What? Who is this? What are you? Some kind of frog?
Easy there, buddy. Just thought I'd hop on the wireless and give you a holler. Don't get mad.
Hacked right into my channel, huh?
Fuck!
What are the latest radio reports?
Every factory is a close, Barony. No tea breaks, so no workings.
Splendid! It's a total calamity. I shall rule the world. I guarantee.
Sorry about that time. I turned you into a frog. It was a wonderful joke.
Why is there a frog in here?
I don't like them putting chemicals in the water that turn the friggin' frogs gay.
Wasn't that fun? Anyway, the Doctor has to say goodbye to the frog Sillatract. She gets out the portal just in time before the universe in Antizone collapses. The ending, the actual ending, caught me by surprise. I'm quickly going to show you a short moment from it, and maybe you could tell me what stands out for you. Yeah, there's no talking. There's no talking. We're shown everything that's needed to be seen and understand how every character is feeling without a single word uttered from anyone. Combine that with the fantastic music and it makes for a darn powerful scene. They're even able to incorporate the text the Doctor wrote down previously without having to explicitly say to Eric that it's there. This is probably the best scene in the entire series. I really mean it when I say that. It's so simple, but it gets the point across so well. It is pretty much near perfect, yet this kind of storytelling is so few and far between. The only other times I can think of where this happened in this series was in Arachnids in the UK of all things, where Graham travels back to his house alone and everything is conveyed through his performance. Need I remind you that was what I found to be the best moments in that episode? Don't get me wrong, I'm glad this scene, though a short one, was able to surprise me with its emotional simplicity. I just can't understand why this isn't more prevalent throughout the whole series. I'm not asking for no dialogue or anything, I'm asking that characters shut up every once in a while. This whole series is just everyone spilling their hollow guts out their mouth non-stop to the point where I get so irritated that I just want to punch a doctor. Right before the credits, we get a very touching scene between Ryan and Graham. I would still argue that it would have been stronger had Ryan been through the portal with the Doctor, but it's still good regardless. It's showing progression between these two. It's good seeing how they've changed since the start of the series. More so Graham than Ryan, of course. I don't understand how this series has been able to write Graham properly, but have everyone else fall flat. It's not like Graham's arc throughout the series is complex. It's very basic when you think about it, but it works. I don't understand how they couldn't have done something similar for anyone else. True, it could be that Graham's character arc isn't all that great, and only when you compare it to the others that it appears better than it is, but either way, I find myself caring for Graham way more than I do Yaz, Ryan, or the Doctor. Graham might be a simple character, but he has something. Not one of the other main characters has anything going for them. With that, the episode ends. Another day, Or, in this case, another month, another episode. Is it good? Eh. Is it bad? No. Acceptable? No, mate. To be acceptable, you have to be worth watching. To be worth watching, you have to stand out from the mass amounts of competition. What would I rather do? Would I rather watch a series that's fallen from grace, having lost all its creative spark or any ambition it used to have? Or would I rather watch a cartoon? Play a video game? Watch another show? Draw something? Listen to music? Go online? Go outside? Cancel my TV license? Perhaps? It's not like I need it anymore. Of course, I'm not doing that right now because I'm an idiot. And just a head. If you take anything from this review, I hope you at least see how very small and simple changes could improve this episode. What I've done by just changing little things, whether it be character traits or story structure, would make it so much more bearable to watch. It's not even limited to this episode. Every single episode this series just needs minor changes and rewrites to improve everything. Even an episode as broken as Arachnids in the UK could be salvaged this way. It's like all the scripts never left their first draft before filming started. Whatever. I don't understand what this series is trying to be anymore. It's literally just 4 people bumbling around and getting into trouble, with the writers trying half-heartedly to force a reaction out of us. There is one more episode left in this series, and I don't want to watch it again. I really don't. It isn't quite over yet. We still have bingo. Certainly a close one. Any moment now we may have a complete bingo. In this episode we have... Wait a minute. We don't have anyone. What? You don't have Hannah's actor? Or Eric's actor? Or... I don't know, that alien dude? Well, why not? What does, I don't know, those actors have that justifies their space in the character call that Hannah's actor doesn't? Hannah's had a much bigger role than these characters had, so... I don't understand this. Oh, whatever. Whatever. Bingo sucks anyway. It's getting worse. It's a mess. It isn't even a right bingo card. Bingo cards are supposed to be 5x5, not 4x5. This is stupid. See you in a month or whatever for the last review. Or not. I might not even bother. It's not like there's anything I could say about that episode I haven't already said. Oh my goodness. Series 12 is gonna suck. Oh, by the way, I lied.